Hello, everyone. My name is Todd Caldwell. I'm joined today by Susan Gordon. We are Directors of Audit Services with the State Board of Accounts in our Indianapolis office. We're going to discuss information we request from units that we're planning to audit. This information, mostly about internal controls, will be used in planning how we structure our audits. This information is required by the standards we audit under and is necessary to understand how your particular unit of government operates. So it's important for us to understand your type of political subdivision and what you've got going on in your communities, your internal controls, what factors may be affecting your government. For example, did the major employer in your community close up shop and move out of town? Or are new manufacturers coming in, creating new jobs, people moving to town, which would require additional services to be provided, those types of items. The forms we're going to discuss will capture this information and allow us to plan our audits and determine what audit procedures will be needed for your specific entity. Now, please keep in mind this information we've always gathered for our audits. Sometimes we might have given you the forms and asked you to complete them. Other times our field examiners might have sat down with you and had a discussion about these topics, and the field examiner completed the form. Either way, while actually completing this information might be new for some, it's not additional or added work. This information in the past has been documented on the forms that we're going to talk about. The forms are Board of Accounts internal work paper forms. They're not the prescribed forms that you might be more familiar with. And the forms themselves really aren't the important part. It's the substance on each. I mentioned the auditing standards we audit under require we obtain this information. These forms are currently how we document that we have complied with those standards. So much like you're required to keep documentation related to your accounting items, we have to document our compliance with the auditing standards as well. Currently, we're using these forms to gather and document your information. In the near future, you can expect this information to be requested annually, most likely through a gateway application using a questionnaire format. We're still developing those plans for that. So for now, we're just going to discuss the content and the forms. When will you get these forms? It currently is around the time that the audit is assigned to a field examiner, which will be obviously prior to the start of the audit. We'll send these forms out when an assignment is made to a field examiner. Then you'll complete and return them. And that field examiner will review your responses and then can plan audit procedures accordingly. Sometimes you might be getting a blank form, like you're starting from scratch to input the information. Other times you might get the completed form from the last audit and just be asked to update it. But we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So the first information to discuss is contained in what we call Form 7. It's titled Understanding Internal Controls. It's a multi-page document. It's about 9 or 10 pages, but don't be intimidated by the amount of information we're asking for here. Again, we use this to gain our understanding of your internal controls, so the more information you can provide, the better. After you complete the form, we're going to review it to gain that understanding of how your entity operates and what controls you have. Then we can design auditing procedures based on that understanding. So for example, if we think there's an area where controls might not be that strong, we can plan to do a little more testing there. Same if you have an area that seems to have really good controls, we might design fewer procedures there. But this is a form that we get started with on your understanding of controls. So let's take a look at it, a little closer examples. I've enlarged the first page here just so it's easier to read. But you can see that it asks first for contact information, the name, title, and date of those who we can contact with additional questions. As you know, there are 5 components to internal controls: control environment, risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and monitoring activities. There are questions under each category. Like on the screen, you see question 1 under control environment is asking about communication and enforcement of integrity and ethical values. This page, I've illustrated an example of what we're looking for. It's, again, that first page, and I've entered the contact information. Then question 1A is answered. I put the example answer in blue just to illustrate what I entered versus what's on the pre-printed form. Your response does not have to be in a different color. I mentioned earlier about updating information or forms from prior audits. If you do get sent a completed form and asked to update it, you might consider making your updates in a different color just to distinguish, but you certainly don't have to. This is the bottom of page 1. Again, more questions about internal controls by component. This is page 2. Here we start with the second internal control component, risk assessment. And you can see there won't always just be places for you to type things in. Sometimes you'll see charts, like is illustrated here. On this particular chart, we're under the risk assessment process. So we're asking these questions, these yes or no questions, to help assess the risk. So for example, in the middle of that chart or that table, it says new or revised information systems. I've answered no, but if you did convert computer systems, you would want to answer yes there. And what the answers or responses in this section let us know is that the risk may be a little increased in this area, and that might require some additional procedures. Like if you've ever switched from one accounting system to another, you know that never goes as smoothly as you hope, and maybe some information doesn't get carried forward correctly. That increases the risk that you might have some financial reporting errors or misstatements. So if we see that there's a yes for new or revised information systems, we can design procedures around that. This is another slide to illustrate questions. This one's under the information and communication component and the responses that were made. And finally, we even inquire about your information technology and your computer controls. So that's the information that's contained on Form 7. Now I'm going to turn it over to Susan so she can discuss the Form 9.
The next form is Form 9, Understanding Your Entity and the Environment in which it operates. Auditing standards require the State Board of Accounts to gain an understanding of the entity we are auditing and its environment. This understanding must be for your particular unit, not just a unit type in general. One way that we gain that understanding is through inquiry, and that is the purpose of the Form 9. This form should be sent to you prior to the start of the audit. As it operates currently, you may just need to update the form from the prior audit if much of the information is the same. In the future, it may be provided as an online form. Try to answer each area completely. Here is a portion of the blank form with the first page enlarged so you can see it easily. Various questions will be asked about your entity. There are different questions for different unit types because each unit type will have different factors for consideration. For this presentation, we will be using the form for cities and towns. A county's form will be somewhat different, as will the form and questions for other unit types, such as a school, library, or township. Here's the second half of page 1. Note that it lists the primary activities, programs, and services of a city or town, with instructions to delete those that do not apply. This list of primary activities has been taken from statutory provisions for cities and towns. Remember, not every city or town will have all of these activities. So if, for example, you represent a town that does not have a municipal airport, you will strike through H regarding aviation. This form will be customized for you with applicable activities listed for each unit type. This is an example of how a clerk-treasurer would complete the form. You will want to start with your name, title, and date. Here we have Todd Caldwell as the town clerk-treasurer for the town of Toddville. It is important to fill in all of the contact information completely. Next, you will need to go through each program and activity to see if it is applicable to your city or town or unit. You can see Toddville doesn't provide zoning activities, protective inspection, probation, urban redevelopment, or airport activities, so those have been lined out. As you move through the form, you will see this table requesting information by department. The names of standard departments are provided for you. Of course, you will need to strike through those that do not apply or add others that do. Again, this form is customized for all unit types. This just happens to be a city and town example. For each department, you will be asked if there are any new or major accounting items, federal money received, money collection points, and any indicated problems or concerns. These are just yes or no questions. However, if you answer yes to new or major accounting items or yes to indicated problems, you will be asked to describe those items identified in a separate table. New or major accounting items might include new debt issued, fee or rate increases, construction projects, or new accounting software. You can see in our example for the town of Toddville that certain departments were not applicable, such as the Department of Aviation. Also, in the town of Toddville, certain concerns in the Parks Department were identified and described. The right column is for State Board of Accounts use only, and that has to do with the follow-up of prior audit findings. This form will also ask for information on the governing boards and the background and work experience for each member. On down, the form will request the name, title, and contact information for the executive branch members. The title of each person is already filled in for you. You just need to put in the name and contact information. Please indicate if a position is not applicable to your unit. For example, in our town of Toddville, we do not have an electric utility superintendent. The form continues on to ask information regarding the division of authority and responsibilities between the governing body and the responsible officials. You can see a portion at the bottom of this screen. We have identified the statutory powers and duties for each elected official. And again, these forms will be customized by unit type. The rest of the form asks questions related to industry, regulatory, and other external factors, major sources of revenue and major expenditures, types of investments, and sources of financing. In the operations sections, questions will be asked about your unit's major funds, key elements of your budgetary process, services provided, significant transactions, policies on investments, compensation, and debt management, and capital assets. All of this information is important so that we can have a complete understanding of your unit and how it operates. Documentation of this understanding is required by professional auditing standards.
Okay, now let's talk about the Form 45. As you know, we have stressed the importance of internal controls, and this form, along with the information on the Form 7 that I discussed earlier, are vital in planning audit procedures and seeing what areas have strong internal controls and which areas that need more attention. This one is understanding controls in certain audit areas by class. Now, our work paper form is in Excel and has multiple tabs. What we're going to be sending you is the tab on understanding controls. We'll try to send the one from the last audit so that it's updated, or for you to update so that you're not starting from scratch. But if you have to complete a blank one or a new one, this one's more in depth than that Form 7. This one gets into specifics like who takes in the money and issues receipts, who posts those to the ledger, who does the bank reconciliation, who reviews it, those types of items. The instructions give a good description of what this is for and why it's needed. You'll see one main thing that we're looking for here is segregation of duties. We've stressed the importance of segregation of duties in the past, and it's a main activity that we'll be looking for in this set of information. So even if you're a one-person office, you can get others involved, like you've heard us mention before, board members, the fiscal officer of a neighboring community, deputies, anybody that you can get involved in the process helps segregate duties and are the types of things that we're looking for on this form and in your controls. So for each audit area, you will see the initiating authority. That's when a class of transaction is initiated. Recording and processing. That's the process for recording that class of transaction and then reconciling and reporting that particular class of transaction. And the types of, or the classes of transactions are receipts. So that's what we're seeing here. This transaction class is for receipts. There's also one for vendor disbursements, payroll disbursements, cash and investments, and your financial statement notes. If we don't have a Form 45 from the last audit, or if it's been used several times and it's time to maybe start from scratch, we'll send you, instead of a blank Form 45, we'll send you a questionnaire that looks like this one. You'll go ahead and answer in the unit response section, and we'll use those answers and put in the Form 45 for our field staff to evaluate. Now I'll hand it back over to Susan.
Our auditing standards require us to document management's acceptance of the financial statements being audited, which brings us to our next form, Form 13. It is titled Management Oversight of Non-Audit Services. The financial statement, notes to the financial statement, and schedules are generated by Gateway with the information input by the fiscal officer. This form asks management to review the financial statement, notes, and schedules to make sure that all of the information is correct and presented as management has intended. You're confirming that this is the same information you entered in Gateway and that the records of your unit support the information contained in the financial statement. Here's a closer view of the first half of page 1. As you can see, for the financial statement, the statement of receipts, disbursements, other financing sources and uses, and cash and investment balances, you will be asked if the beginning cash and investments agree with the prior year ending balances for each fund and for the total of all funds, whether ending balances are reported correctly for each fund and the total of all funds, and whether the titles of the funds are properly recorded for each fund. Here you can see the second half of page 1 with similar questions related to the supplementary schedules and to the schedule of expenditures of federal awards, if applicable. It is important that all of the financial information, as compiled, is presented as intended by management and is accepted by management. This form is our documentation of that acceptance. The confirmation paragraph is contained at the end of this document. You will want to read this carefully. This form is to be printed, signed, and returned to the State Board of Accounts. This concludes our presentation on the Forms 7, 9, 45, and 13. If you have any questions, our Directors of Audit Services are available at the email addresses as shown or by calling 317-232-2513. Thank you for listening.